welcome back to the Perform Podcast, episode number 31 today. I was just going to do a bit of a quicker one. Obviously spend a lot of time in between our podcasts and it's a bit of a delay and everything, but I thought we want to try and get back into a bit of a rhythm and try and just put out a little bit more snippets of education in terms of what we do in here and just try and pass on a little bit more knowledge. So I thought I'd come up with a new little segment called just Weekly PD. So what we do in here as a group every week, we'll come in, we'll have a bit of a team meeting, and then we'll run over like educational topics. And it's a good way for us to just kind of have a bit more of those kind of like hallway conversations. We end up getting a lot of information out of it. And just running over subjects, running over topics, running over different pieces that we've been doing, trying to adjust what we're doing, trying to make things better, even agree, disagree on certain things, and just have more conversations around different elements of what we do as a entire company and an entire organization. And like with us, we do it with different departments. So S&C will do one, physio will do one, high performance will do one, and just kind of alternate through. And it's a good way just to run over different topics and just keep ourselves up to date a bit more. So I thought I'd just run over one of the ones we've been talking about a little bit, just in terms of like profiling side of things. But before I get into that, I also just want to quickly note in terms of very quick happy birthday to Keith. And that was him turning up. But if you haven't already, make sure just to send him a DM. I'm sure it'll take you 4 weeks to get a reply, but definitely send him a message or send him a bit of spam or a GIF or something, which I'm sure he'll appreciate. But back to the actual subject. So again, weekly PD. We'll do one of these every. Try and do these at least once a week if we can, and then just even get the different coaches on here just to run through what they're teaching, because everyone has a little bit of a go at it. So thought I'd just quickly run over just like a profiling aspect and kind of our philosophy a bit more, and kind of especially where we're heading with what we do. And this is something that we've kind of been designing in the background called like the Perform profile. So essentially like kind of like the name behind it is essentially like the profile designs a program. And that's something that we believe in a fair bit. And it's something that we utilize a fair bit, where each individual that comes in is their own person, is their own essential profile. So, and there's many different things that will influence a different profile. And as you start to gather this information and pick up more pieces, it then starts to organize and edit the program a bit more. So my example of the profile designs, the program, is initially if I had someone walk in and I had no information, there's probably about 1 million different exercises that I could select. Now, if I find out what their injury history is, that then just with that piece of information, then we'll start to edit and remove certain exercises in my brain that I thought I might select. Then from there, if I ask training history, that'll then remove it down and sharpen it a bit more. And it's kind of that thought process of like the more information, the more data, the more bits and pieces that I pick up of this individual, that'll then start to design their profile, and then at the same time, it should start to design my program. So if I have an athlete that comes in, they play AFL, they have a training history of 2 years, they have reoccurring calf strains on one side of their body, and maybe they've only done 6 months of strength and conditioning. If I just have those pieces alone, that already then starts to create exercise selection, exercise frequency, volume, intensity, and it just starts to pull those pieces apart a little bit more. So hopefully just that little philosophy in its own is a good lesson, that your interview process and your data collection and your constant ongoing evaluation of an individual athlete and your constant profiling of an athlete should then make your job a lot easier. Because I know as a strength and conditioning coach, as you design programs, you can get a lot of anxiety, and especially in the world that we're in now with how much information is available, it can be extremely overwhelming with all the options that you've got. And we've got good resources that help decipher through those a little bit more, and then we've got other resources which help make it more confusing. So by you finding out more information, no matter how much you know, that should then start to just clear your mind a bit more, remove all of the fog around the outside and all of the other options that you've got, and just nail your decision making from there. So, and just wanted to quickly run through this, and I'll probably just spend 5 minutes or so and then just literally wrap it up there. But from our thought process, it's obviously there's a bunch of different influences, and there's influences from, like I said, training history. There's influences from the individual's personality. That'll change things. There's injury history. There's training age, there's sports they selected, there's how old they are as well, and there's multitude of factors that influence nutrition status, education status, et cetera, which will all start to help. But then from our side, and more of a sports science, more of a S&C side of things, is obviously the profiling of the actual testing data that we collect. So in my brain as I go through it, and this is kind of just to help create a little bit of an image behind it, and obviously just creating our own little spider graphs and things like that for us just to help connect the dots a bit more. And this is something that we'll hopefully be using very soon. But thinking about it in this sense where it's like you've got it from the very base level. So we've got all of your basic isometric testing. So we're lucky in here with equipment where we've got be able to do calf iso pushes, knee iso pushes, hamstring testing, et cetera. But there's obviously elements where you don't need that equipment where you can test it. You can still test calf endurance. You can still test hammy endurance. You can still do other isolated muscle testing. And then even the most important piece on top of all that is just your actual program. Monitoring and tracking the strength or coordination or whatever it might be of these certain areas should already start to just build a bit of a profile about where the strength is compared to where we kind of want it to be. So we've got in that isolated muscle kind of area. Then we transition up a bit more to like dynamic reactive strength side of things. So then that creates another level up from there. Then from there, you're going to move up a little bit higher in terms of more like the actual strength testing side of things. So where are you sitting in terms of like your actual strength numbers and arguments across both the boards in terms of importance and not importance and everything like that. But you just weigh it up for your own individual athletes and what you want, and you set base KPIs. There's obviously like going from a 280 to a 300 squat, like what's the benefit in that? But if I've got a developing athlete who can only squat 80 kilos, when most kids their age or a good baseline to be might be 110, 120 kilos, like relative to all the other pieces in there, that could be beneficial to build up to that, especially more as you get in towards the older adult populations and collisions are more intense and the demands of the body are more intense. Then it's like strength going to have an important piece. So you've got your muscle testing, you've got your dynamic reactive strength, you've got your actual big global strength movements and even your power movements in terms of like your hang power snatches and cleans and bits and pieces like that. And then you can go down to like your on-field, like your speed, conditioning, change direction. So from a physical development standpoint where we can monitor and track, you've got like a tiered system to build up and through. And that's kind of like our thought process and philosophy is like understanding that sometimes a lot of people get caught at that baseline in terms of like the calves are just this strong and the hammies are just this strong, et cetera, et cetera. But it's also having that ability to then connect it in with, all right, well, what's the dynamic strength? What's the reactive strength? And how are they correlating? And then what's the actual global strength of the system? And then most importantly, how fast can they get to? What are their change of direction capabilities of speed and coordination and skill and everything? And then like conditioning and fitness and things like that as well. So they're all pieces that influence each other, and you can look up and down the reins in terms of like, well, if I've got deficiencies in my acceleration, then I can look down the train at certain things like, or I can look at my strength and how's my strength through more acceleration transferable kind of movements, and then even go back a level from there. It's like, all right, well, how much, if I'm doing a squat jump, how much watts per kilo can I push out, or how much force can I push to the floor? And then if I go back a level from there, it's like, oh, how much strength have I got in my seated calf iso push, or et cetera, et cetera. Potentially could be pieces for some people, potentially not for others, but you've got a bit of a framework there to think about to move up and down. And usually in injury side of things, we can start to move up. And then if you're in a performance element, you can start to trace back and kind of find links in the chain to try and create like your own little profile. So, and that's kind of like the way we think about it. So like you've got like your profile in terms of like out of what percentage are you sitting at for all of your different pieces. You've got some information there. So in terms of an actual profiling side of things, that's just our little, very short little nutshell that's probably got nowhere near enough context in it, but it's just a bite-sized little part of our weekly PD that we do. And if you can just take that one piece away where the more you can collect on an individual, the more you've got. And sometimes that's not just taking them to do a test once a week. Sometimes it's just training them in a session. That's profiling in itself. I watch the way you move on field today versus I watch the way you move on field last week. That's part of your profiling and your data collection. Your output from one week to the next is different. The way you move on certain movements. There's a lot of subjectivity to that profiling element as well, but from an objective profiling standpoint, there's a lot of different pieces that you can collect that should help to build your profile. So if I'm looking down here and I'm looking at even just here, I'm like, all right, cool, my squat jumps are in a good position, my drop jumps are in a good position, but my CMJ is not where I want it to be. So then that should start to change different influences of, all right, the counter movement that's involved with that and how does that transfer. And then even if I go to like a lower body part and I go, all right, I look at these movements and I go, these ones are pretty good, decent positions. And I go, all right, my seated calf in that position's not as good. Cool. That'll influence my program design a little bit more and I might fill in that gap. And then you use that to kind of just build the whole profile up across the board rather than just randomly throwing exercises onto a sheet. So hopefully that helps. And we'll try and get the other guys on board as well for a few podcasts and try and do this a bit more regularly.